record the middle. Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us today. I'm going to wait another 30 seconds before I get underway because I think we may have some additional folks that join us. And I will go ahead and get started. So I'll start with welcome everyone. This is the 2024 Suballocated Programs Call for Projects Planning and Policy Committee workshop, or pre-application workshop. As you know, we conducted a call for projects earlier this spring, and we've gone through some work as staff assessing the alignment of those projects with the goals and objectives and our policy objectives in our long-range transportation plan in Connecticut C 2050. So this will be an opportunity to share the results of our work as staff, and also share the results of some feedback that we've gotten from you as members of our planning policy committees about that staff work. And we'll talk about that, and we'll go through some next steps. My name is Martin Riverola. I am the Assistant Director of Transportation and Land Use with the Mid-America Regional Council, and I will be running the bulk of the workshop, the presentation today. I will have some other people on the MARC staff side that will be helping out and participating during the question and answer part of this event. I do want to ask you to please, and I see some of you are already doing that, if you can add your name and the organization you represent in the chat, that would be very helpful. And also, if you can add the planning or policy committee that you represent as well. We do have a few MARC staff on the call. I'd like to ask those of you on the staff side to just turn your camera on and just do a brief introduction before we get underway, as you may be called on to help answer questions as we get underway. And maybe Ron, if you can get us kicked off.
Thanks, Martin. Good afternoon, everyone. Ron Acapul. I'm the Director of Transportation and Environment here at MARC. And Mark Hansen.
Yes, good afternoon, everyone. Mark Hansen, Principal Planner at Mid-America Regional Council.
Hi, my name is Taylor Cunningham. I'm a transportation planner at MARC, and I work a lot on the PSP program.
Good afternoon, Beth Dawson, Principal Planner in the Transportation Department.
Patrick Truba, Active Transportation Planner and Staff Liaison to BPAC and ATPC.
I think, Kyle, you're the last one. You haven't already gone.
Yeah, I'm Kyle Honer. I'm an intern for the Transportation Department at MARC.
All right. So I think just by my count, I think we've gotten there maybe a couple more folks. And if you're called on to speak at some point later on, just please feel free to turn your camera on and unmute your microphone and introduce yourself as MARC staff. But I'll go ahead and get underway. So as I indicated, as we got things kicked off, our agenda for this afternoon will be, I'll be spending a few minutes talking about our programming and our evaluation process. So the process that we followed as MARC staff to assess the alignment of these projects with a transportation plan. It is a very similar process, or actually the same process that we followed a couple of different cycles already. So it's interestingly enough, we are following now. We're developing some historical trends. How about this call for projects have gone compared to previous rounds, and I'll be sharing a few words about that. Then I will be sharing the results of the staff assessment that we shared both with all of the project sponsors, and then we also shared with all of the members of our planning and policy committee. So those of you here, if you're on the call, and then the analysis of that work. Then after that, I will be sharing the results of the committee member assessment. So we had asked you as members of our planning policy committees to tell us about what you thought, whether you concurred or not with the result of the staff assessment, and to share some thoughts that you may have about the project package as was submitted to Mark. So I'll be sharing those. We'll be wrapping up with some takeaways and discussion, and we do have some questions. We'll see if we can get some conversation going with all of you as members of our planning and policy committees, and then we'll be wrapping up with next steps. So that's our agenda for the next hour or so. Hope we'll see if we can get it done in less time than that. We'll see how it goes. So with that, to kick off with our programming process, and I'm sure that most of you have already seen this, but it just as a quick reminder, the pre-application process, the phase one, is a process that was set in place two or three cycles ago now, that had as a goal to strengthen the quality and strengthen the alignment of the projects that are submitted that compete for these regional transportation funds with the regional vision and the goals and objectives that we have in our long-range transportation plan in Connected KC 2050, our Metropolitan Transportation Plan. Prior to us instituting this process, we had seen over a couple of cycles that some of our scores of projects that were competing for suballocated transportation or surface transportation funds had been trending down. So we instituted this process to see if we could reverse that and actually strengthen the quality and the alignment of those projects with the transportation plan, and I think we have seen that. We also wanted to elevate the role of the planning and policy committees in the programming process by giving you sort of a say in the process earlier in the project review process. Wanted to reinforce conformance of the roadway capacity projects with, at the time, a few years ago, with our newly adopted congestion management process policy at the time, and some other key policies as well. And we also wanted to provide an option for members of our committees to provide some feedback and project enhancement tips directly to project sponsors as they prepare their application for the full technical application, or phase two, which in this case is due to open on June 20th. So in about 2 weeks, a little bit more than 2 weeks from now. So that's the goal that we had set for ourselves. This, as all of you know, there's a number of policy documents that really serve to guide our selection of projects that are candidates for some of these funds that are awarded through the MARC process. Of course, the Connected KC 2050 plan is our Metropolitan Transportation Plan, and really does serve as a guiding document and policy guidance for selection of projects that are awarded through the MARC processes. We have some other key policies that we hope also influence, and we've seen a really positive movement in this area. I'll say a few words about a couple of them. The Complete and Green Streets policy really serves as a guiding document that all of our investments, all roadway investments, really should serve users of all modes and all of abilities. And there is also a green infrastructure element to that policy as well. So it really does serve to hopefully influence the projects that are submitted and receive the funds. A few years ago, the MARC Board of Directors and the Total Transportation Policy Committee adopted a congestion management process policy that, in a few words, says that single occupant vehicle capacity, roadway capacity projects really should be addressed mainly to address existing congestion on the current system that we have, and that they should also incorporate transportation demand management and system management strategies as part of the project, in addition to, or perhaps any additional roadway capacity improvements to that specific project. We also have a clean air and a climate action plan. Clean air plan has been in place for a few years. Climate action plan is a little bit more recent. They do seek to improve air quality, reduce emissions, reduce greenhouse gas emissions in our system. And another long-standing policy that's influenced our programming work has been the major river crossing policy that seeks to provide bicycle pedestrian facilities across the major rivers in our region. So our evaluation process, as has been discussed and shared with our planning and policy committees and programming committees as well, really has as an outcome of this, or an anticipated outcome or desired outcome, that we're able to categorize projects submitted for consideration into three buckets, and we have ended up with four in this case, and we ended up with four in the previous round as well. But the hope was that we categorize these projects into those projects that are highly aligned with the goals and objectives of our transportation plan, KC 2050, projects that are perhaps aligned with the goals and objectives of our transportation plan, identify any projects that may not be aligned for any given reason. And we ended up in this case with some incomplete assessments, giving that perhaps a little bit of a lack of information in some of the pre-applications that were submitted to be able to complete a thorough assessment. The determination of whether projects land on either one of these buckets is really based on three different criteria. The first one is whether or not the projects are in conformance with the applicable Connecticut KC 2050 policies. These are the ones that I mentioned in the previous slide. Second sort of key factor in looking at the alignment of these projects is whether or not these projects are included in our long-range transportation plan, or whether they are listed as a supporting program in the transportation plan. And I'll say a couple more words about that here in a slide that's coming up. And third, and also very importantly, the degree to which the project or the program advances strategies that are identified in Connecticut KC 2050. And I'll say a couple more words about that here in the next slide. As another anticipated outcome of this process, we also seek to generate recommendations for improvements for those project sponsors that they can consider implementing in their technical applications as they are submitted for the second round of or the full application that will be opening up here in a couple of weeks. We did have, as we released the results of our staff assessment, and as we heard back from a few of you with your comments about how do we determine the degree to which a project is highly aligned or not. A lot of that has to do with this last bullet shown here on the screen, the degree to which a project or program advances number of strategies in the transportation plan. So I'll share here how we did that analysis. We looked at all 132 applications that were submitted for consideration. And we actually looked at how many strategies were claimed to be advanced by individual project sponsors. And we generated this bell curve as you see here on the screen. And based on this analysis, we looked at, the projects that advanced 9 or more strategies were really sort of above the peak of the, and more than half or less than half of the applications. And we consider that to be the breaking point. So when looking at projects that are either aligned or highly aligned, if a project advanced more than 9 strategies, we consider that to be sort of the breaking point. More than 9 strategies would be a project that's highly aligned, and less than 9 is a project that's simply aligned. We'd not only looked at the number of strategies that were being claimed to be advanced by a project sponsor. We did review those and took a look at those and considered whether those were a fair and correct sort of assumptions or by project sponsors themselves. We sort of gave applicants the benefit of the doubt, but if project sponsor was in any way close to advancing a selected strategy, we acknowledged and we sort of awarded or gave credit for that strategy being advanced by a project. We got a few questions on this during the committee member assessments. I wanted to just spend a minute to share that. Here's another way of looking at the process for how we determine whether projects were highly aligned or not aligned. And just to kind of walk through this logic here real quickly, reviewed projects, and the first question was, is the project in conformance? Or maybe another way of saying that is a project in violation of one of these policies that I mentioned? And if the answer to any of those was no, then those projects were deemed to be not aligned. Then if the answer was yes, these projects are in conformance with all the policies. Then the second question was, is a project or program listed as in at least one? Is it in the transportation plan as a financially constrained project, or it is a high priority illustrative project? And if neither one of those is a project listed as a supportive program in Kinetic AC 2050. And we do have a lot of examples of those. And I'll give you an example here. If a project is perhaps not included in our transportation plan, but is considered to be a reconstruction of an existing roadway. We do have a supporting program included in our transportation plan that's transportation asset management. So that roadway, that reconstruction project would qualify as an asset management program, and the answer to that would be yes. And then the next sort of threshold there was, did that project advance more 9 or more strategies? If the answer to that was yes, then it will be a highly aligned project. And the answer to that is no, then we're looking at the aligned bucket, as you can see here on the screen. So that kind of just a quick run through of the logic that we use. This may come up later during the Q&A, but that is the process that we use to arrive at the highly aligned or aligned or not aligned, or in some cases also incomplete applications. I do want to stress this next point. All project alignment assessments that we have released as staff and that will now be released to project sponsors as project sponsors prepare their full applications in over the summer months are draft in nature. So these may change with new information that is provided as part of their phase 2 technical application. So if a project was previously listed as not aligned, perhaps if that project and the full application addresses issues that were identified through this process, those projects could very well move into another category. So these assessments are draft in nature, and they are subject to change after the full technical application that will be conducted over the next 6 to 8 weeks. So with that, I am now going to be pivoting to results of the staff assessment and analysis. But perhaps before doing so, maybe I'll take a breath, I'll pause for a second, and I'll see if anybody has any questions about the process that we followed to arrive at these determinations. Any questions, please just turn your webcam on and speak up, or you may also drop it in the chat. And if not, I will keep going. So the results of the staff assessment and analysis, some of you may have seen some of this information in the past, but as you know, we received a total of 132 applications, a few more applications in Missouri than in the Kansas side of the state line. We did have a few regional applications and a couple that were submitted by Mark. The breakdown of the funding that was requested from the state line across the state line and regional applications is consistent with how we have seen this in years past. Perhaps the numbers are a little bit bigger, but we do have an oversubscribed sort of program. There are more funds being requested than dollars available to programs. So this work is very important because it will help our region arrive at the funding recommendations that are ultimately made through this process by the end of this year. When you look at the mode split for how these funds were requested, we had a few more. We had about 60% of the funds being requested towards road and bridge and operations projects. We had about 26, so about a quarter, a little bit more than a quarter of the funds requested address directly the bike ped mode. We had about 11% of those funds being requested addressing the transit mode, a little bit under 1% for other category. So that's how these were split up. When you look at how staff assessed these projects initially, we broke them down. About 40% of the 132 applications ended up being in the highly aligned category, which is consistent with how we've done this and how we've seen these in previous rounds. We did have almost half of the submitted applications that were deemed to be not aligned. I'm sorry, aligned projects, almost half aligned projects. And we did have 3% that were, or 4 total applications that were deemed to be not aligned. And 8% or a total of 8 that were deemed to be incomplete. And I'll say a couple more words about that right now. Of those 4 applications that were deemed by staff to be not aligned at this point, 2 of those, so of the 4, 2 of those had issues with the congestion management process policies or new roadways and in green field sites, perhaps not addressing existing congestion or not sufficient information being provided at this time. So we did have 2 of those that sort of fell in that bucket. And then we did have 2 other ones that were roadways that were not perhaps including bicycle pedestrian facilities as part of the projects. So we did have a total of 4 of those, and those comments were prepared and shared with the project sponsors and also shared with you all as members of our planning policy committees. We had 11 applications that did not directly address information about green infrastructure included as part of those projects. We do have some questions about whether green infrastructure, native vegetation or addition of tree plantings as part of a project would be perhaps eligible or applicable to some of these projects. So I'll share some information with you here in a few minutes, and we'll talk through how we should address the issue of green infrastructure as part of these projects through this call and also as part of the phase 2 process. So that's how those numbers break down. What I have here on the screen, I have a number of slides, and mostly just for reference purposes. All of you received a listing of projects and their project categorization of whether it's highly aligned or aligned or not aligned or incomplete through the MARC member portal, where you were invited to participate and provide your comments. So you should have all received this information. But I do have sort of a PDF or table or a chart on the slide in case we need to at some point go back and refer to it during the conversation that we'll have. But I mentioned there's 40 projects that were highly aligned. These are all shown in these 3 slides. 49 projects that were deemed to be by MARC staff to be aligned. And these are shown here in these, believe, 3 slides. And then we had a number of slides that were either deemed to be not aligned or incomplete due to lack of information, mainly about green infrastructure elements. And I will go ahead and now move into what you shared with us about this assessment work. Before doing so, I will once again pause and I'll see if anybody has any questions about the staff assessment work. Otherwise, I will assume that it just made a lot of sense and you spent a lot of time looking into it and there's no questions at this point. So a few weeks ago, we did share the results of the staff assessment with members of our planning policy committees. And we did get quite a bit of participation from you all. So I do want to say thank you for spending the time to all of you and reviewing those projects. We did get quite a bit more engagement this time around than we did 2 years ago. So here's the results of that work. We received 803 individual project reviews that were submitted through the MARC committee member portal. And just for some context, last time we did this 2 years ago, we were at about 350 completed individual project reviews that were submitted. So that means that between all of you on the call, each time you looked at a project and you indicated, yes, I agree with the work of MARC staff, or no, I do not agree, and here's my comments, that counted as 1. So there were 803 of those, more than double what we received from you 2 years ago, last time we did this. In total, there were 29 reviewers. So that's also quite a bit higher than what we received 2 years ago. Last time we did this, there was 19. So we got 10 more of you to participate in this work. So some of you spent more time and assessed or reviewed more projects. Some of you only reviewed 2 or 3 projects as you were looking at those. but those are all very much appreciated for all the work and time you spent looking through the portal. We also have a number of committees that we have invited to participate in this process, all the ones shown on the screen. And as you can see there on the screen, we did have sort of across the board participation from on most of our committees. We did have one that was perhaps missing there. And that's a good point for us to look at. And as we look into future programming rounds, we'll perhaps engage in a little bit different ways with the Climate and Environment Council to kind of raise their involvement with this process as well. But generally, we're very pleased to look at the participation, the number of you that actually took the time to give us your feedback, and how well distributed was the comment across a number of these different committees. Out of those 132 candidate projects that were submitted as part of the pre-application, 131 of them actually received at least one individual review by a member of our planning and policy committees. So almost all of them had at least somebody else outside of Mark staff look at it and provide some comments. And this process generated 174 committee member comments, questions, and suggestions for that. So as a reminder of what we will do with those, where we will actually be packaging each one of those submitted questions or comments or tips, and we will be packaging those without necessarily the name. We will not be sharing the name as part of this work, but just the comments. We will be sharing those directly with project sponsors, so it can be helpful and it can help inform the phase 2 application, perhaps help address any questions that members of our committees had as part of those projects. So 174 of those comments and questions will be shared with project sponsors for those applications, and we do hope that that will help sort of address a lot of the questions that we may have regionally and elevate, in some cases, the quality of the projects that are being submitted as part of this process. So as far as how you think you did, this is the grade card, the scorecard for the staff assessment work and what you as members of our committees thought about, whether you agreed or not with our work. And these are the results of that. We had, I mentioned, 803 individual project reviews. Of those, 92% of the entries were just you as member of our committee saying, yeah, we concur with the Mark staff assessment work and with your categorization of the project. So that was 92% of those, which means that 8%, there were 61 individual notes about either disagreement with a Mark staff assessment or questions, or perhaps questions about the scope or about the type of project, or some clarification that was needed to either the staff assessment or to the way a project was described by a project by an applicant, by a sponsor. So 92% concurrence with the Mark staff assessment and 8% questions. I will say that last time we did this work in 2022, those numbers back then were exactly like this time, 92% concurrence and 8% sort of disagreement at that point. So we're very much tracking with the way this work was done 2 years ago. When we look at how those projects were broken out into those projects that were highly aligned or not aligned or incomplete, we had even higher, 96% concurrence with the projects that are highly aligned. So perhaps there's a lot of agreement that those projects that staff deemed to be highly aligned on the committee side, there's a lot of agreement that that was indeed the case. Also the case with those projects that were deemed to be aligned by Mark staff, you members of our committees, also more than 90% agreement with that. We did have some questions with those projects that were deemed to be not aligned or incomplete. With not aligned, not as many projects, as a much smaller list, but we did have four comments that had some questions or perhaps dissent with how those projects were categorized as being not aligned. And we had 21% of those questions for those projects that were incomplete as well. In total, so what I will be doing now over the next couple of minutes, couple of slides, I will just be focusing on not on the highly aligned or aligned comments from you as members of our planning policy committees, but instead I'll be focusing on those comments and dissent, I guess, that we received on the not aligned and incomplete categories. So I mentioned out of those 803 comments or individual project reviews. There were 61 reviews in total that noted some disagreement with the staff assessment. So that's 8%, and not necessarily a disagreement. Perhaps it could have been some request for clarification, or has some observations about the project scope or the narrative. So of those 61, 40 of those did not specifically ask for a project to be recategorized in a different bucket. So if it was a highly aligned project, perhaps 40 of those did not really say move this project either way, but they just noted perhaps a request for clarification, or request for more information about the project scope. Of those 61, we did get 11 specific requests that a project move up in its alignment status. So that could be a project that was categorized by Mark staff as aligned. We got 11 reviews asking that those projects move up a bit to highly aligned. And we got 9 requests for projects to move down in their alignment status from perhaps highly aligned down to aligned or something like that. So again, to put this in context, out of 803 total reviews, we had got 20 that actually asked for those alignment statuses to be changed. So I'll say a few more words about those 20 out of 103. And kind of be just looking through each one of those and sharing those with you for our discussion. So we did have, and projects that were in the high aligned bucket, there was 2 of those, 2 requests for additional consideration of 2 of these projects, and that were deemed by staff to be highly aligned. In about 2 projects, one is the Chipman Road signal controller and detection upgrades in Lee Summit, and Share Road reconstruction also in Lee Summit. So the questions around these projects that were deemed by staff to be highly aligned, that these are projects that are in lightly developed or developing areas, which perhaps may not advance as many of the Connectivity 2050 strategies. And I shared with you how we deemed we used that bell curve early on to put those projects into the different buckets. That particularly applies to the first project that's shown here on the screen. The second project, there was some concern that was noted due to perhaps disturbance of natural areas, the location of the project in a mostly greenfield site with no current development, perhaps it perceived a regional benefit. I do want to note that there was only one concern noted for each submission to actually move the project or recategorize the project, not as a highly aligned project. But even having said that, majority of the reviews that we received for those projects actually said, let's keep that project right where it is. So we did get a comment for each one of those to perhaps move them down. But in the case of Chipman Road, out of the 7, 6 still said this is perhaps where it should be. And the Share Road reconstruction, out of the 4, 3 said to keep it as a highly aligned project. So that's where that one is. When looking at the aligned projects, we did have a little bit more sort of input into whether these projects that are shown here on the screen as aligned by staff should move up or down. We had the projects that are shown in red were the ones that some people were just asking, maybe these are projects that should come down. And projects that are shown in green in the upper half of the table, perhaps had at least one comment from a member of our committee that project should move up. As you can see there on the screen. There was some concern or questions from those that requested these projects to be recategorized, that perhaps there was some incomplete information and the ones that are shown here in red, or really the projects that are shown in green, that they really should advance some additional sort of strategies and should be moving up on the list of reviews, or in the categorization status of each one of these projects. And then we got 2 requests for projects that staff had deemed to be either not aligned or incomplete for these projects to move up. And one of these projects is Commercial Street, M291 to Independence in Harrisonville, and one, the Mississippi pedestrian connection in the city of Liberty. We must note that these projects did comply with a majority of the Connectivity 2050 policies. We did have a question about perhaps for the Mississippi pedestrian connection, maybe it did not include information to be able to assess around green infrastructure. And also on the first project there on the list, the lack of complete street programming to facilitate bicycle facilities as part of that project. But were comments that were shared with us from each from each one of these projects about perhaps that those projects should be moved up in the categorization of those. So now I'd like to just spend a couple of minutes in sharing and discussing our projects that were deemed to be by Mark staff as incomplete. And all of those really relate back to our green infrastructure, our complete streets policy, and the green infrastructure framework and the policy, which calls for inclusion of green infrastructure elements as part of our construction projects in the region. Out of those, I'm going to share 2 slides. I mentioned there were 11 of those. These are 5 shown on the screen, and I'm going to have a few more on the next slide. These 5 projects that are shown here on the screen did not perhaps identify specific green infrastructure elements as part of their application. Although we did get some comments and some questions, and frankly, I'll share these are questions that we have ourselves as Mark staff. These are projects that are really inherently support sustainable modes of transportation or low emission or no emission modes of transportation. So a claim could be made that these are just by nature green infrastructure project themselves, even if they perhaps don't include a direct wording or narrative about adding trees or native vegetation as part of the project, but the project themselves are green infrastructure. So we did get a few questions about those, and I will have a question for you about how we address these as part of this process into the future rounds as well. So that's sort of the case here. If you look here, there's an example. There's a KCATA Central Service Campus Solar Power Systems Expansion Project that not address green infrastructure in the narrative, but you could claim that solar, it's renewable power, it's a green infrastructure related project, or perhaps it does meet the policy just by the nature of the type of project that it is. And then we also had under the remainder of the projects that were deemed to be incomplete, we had a few other roadway improvement projects as well that did not specifically address green infrastructure as part of those projects. Looking at this project list, given the nature of these projects, those are perhaps things that can be easily addressed as part of the phase 2 application, either by modifying the project scope or by simply including language in the application that failed to be included as part of the pre-application, and just making sure that language and that is included in the description of the project as the phase 2 application is submitted over the summer. So that is as far as I can take that. I've been speaking now for about 38 minutes, and I am going to be transitioning over to takeaways and discussion. But before doing so, I'm going to go ahead and pause again and see if anybody has any questions about the committee member assessment work that you have done and how I have summarized them. The very next slide is takeaways and questions. All right. Well, I will be transitioning now to our takeaways and discussion. I'll just keep plugging along. So takeaways. So here's what we think after looking at all the work. You submitted 132 applications. We reviewed all of those. We put all those projects into these buckets, or highly aligned and not aligned, and some incomplete. And you told us what you thought about that. The first point that I want to make is I do want to say thank you to all of you who have participated in this process. And I know some of you spent a lot of time working on this, and I know many of you did. So I do want to once again say thank you for your time and helping make the quality of the projects that are competing for these funds higher and better, more elevated in our region. As another takeaway, we do see very high consensus by our members of our committees with the work conducted by staff, and a 92% agreement, which again is very interesting considering that I went back and looked at this same work that we did 2 years ago, and the number was almost carbon copy then as it is now. So overall, high consensus with the work. Out of all those project reviews that came in, we only had 3% of those individual entries of members of our committee saying this project should move up or down in the tables as we had them. So majority of those responses for each project that received sort of a suggestion or a question, um, or maybe a question about this project the scope, still agreed with how we as MARC staff had categorized the project. So overall, we see a lot of consensus, and we feel very happy with how our work and your agreement with our work. So it makes us think that we're sort of on the same page. And this will be helpful for project sponsors as they work on their next application over the summer. And again, we generated 174 comments from you. That will be shared with project sponsors, and we hope that will help the project sponsors be able to improve quality, perhaps the scope, perhaps the narrative around each one of the individual applications. It will raise the bar of all of those projects. We hope that accomplishes that. Uh, based on this assessment or our takeaways, here's where I'd like to now pause and ask some questions of you, if you have any. I have 4 questions that I wanted to just go back and forth with you all. If you have any thoughts on those, I'll go say what those 4 are, and then perhaps I will take them one at a time. But the first question I'd like to have some discussion on or hear from you is, based on this feedback, would you think that or is revisiting any other project alignment tables warranted? We think that's not perhaps necessary given how the results came back, but we wanted to ask that question of you. I would like to also ask you, and for those of you that did submit comments in regards to any one of the submitted projects, if you are interested in expanding on a comment that you may have submitted, we'd like to give you the opportunity to do so. We do have a question about whether we should consider bike ped in electric vehicle related or transit as solar infrastructure projects as inherently green infrastructure projects, even if their applications may be incomplete. So if are those projects that we could just consider to be green infrastructure, and not necessarily put them in the incomplete bucket because they don't specifically mention trees or native grasses, et cetera. Related question to that one is, how do we handle traffic operations projects? We do have a number of projects that were submitted for traffic signal improvement and timing projects, technology related. How do we handle perhaps those in terms or related specifically to the green infrastructure question, when a lot of the project may be more technology related? And then my final question will be, does this project raise the quality of submitted projects? Is it helpful to our regional goals? And is it helpful to our sponsors? Those are the 4 questions that I will be asking of you in the time that we have left. But I will go ahead maybe and go back to the first one. Based on this feedback, is revisiting any other project alignment tables at this point warranted? I'll go ahead and pause, and if you're interested in sharing your comment, please feel free to drop it in the chat, or turn your microphone on and share those thoughts with us. Thank you, Michael. See your comment. We'll get to that one. I'm gonna take silence being, yeah, this is good. This is good to move forward. And I should again reiterate, these are draft alignment tables. We will be able to change those with the feedback from the phase 2. Any thought again from the group? We have about 20 members of our planning policy committee, so you can always come back to this one if somebody gets a thought in the next few minutes. Is anybody interested? If you provided some comments and reviewed a project and provided some comments, perhaps you don't think that I, in the time allotted and the time that I wanted to spend with this, and how I summarize the feedback that was sent in, if you want to expand on your comment, this is a good opportunity to do so. There was 174 of them.
Hey, Martin. Yeah, so again, thanks for the great analysis. This is really good. Everything you put together, it's very insightful. I guess my question, just a couple questions is, how does aligned versus highly aligned gonna impact the decision making on selecting projects? And I guess my basic comment during all this was, as you said, you gave the basically you gave them the benefit of the doubt to the applicant if they said, we meet everything, it's complete streets and safe routes to school. And what I was noticing is between highly aligned and aligned, there's a lot of very similar projects, traffic signal projects, or, adding sidewalks to a busy roadway, and then some are highly aligned and some are just aligned, even though they're very, very similar. And it seemed to be that one applicant just threw everything in there, green infrastructure, safe routes to school, everything. And then another applicant just kind of maybe didn't throw in every word. So, so are similar projects, just because one's highly aligned, the other one's aligned, but they're very similar projects, are they going to be scored similarly during the funding?
Thank you very much for that question. That's a great question. Perhaps Mark, if I could ask you to address that part of the question. I'll address the second part here briefly. And again, I already shared this, but we did look at the number of strategies that were claimed to be advanced by project sponsors. We did review those, and we did do some critical thinking about those, about whether those made sense or not. In some cases, we thought that some project sponsors could have claimed some additional strategies and advanced some additional strategies, didn't check the boxes they could have actually checked. And in some cases, perhaps they were checking a little bit too many of them. But generally, when in doubt, we gave them the benefit of the doubt if anywhere close. We did look at that bell curve, and we thought that regardless of which way we looked at it, that bell curve was somewhat consistent. It didn't really change much, so we went with it, and we went with again, giving the benefit of the doubt to the strategies that were claimed by each one of the project sponsors. But we did review those, and they were generally very close, and we agreed with what most people claimed for those projects. So I feel pretty confident saying that those are close for the process, for the intent of this process. And maybe Mark, if you can address this, the first part of the question about how is this work used as part of the second phase.
Sure. In the past, when we have gone through the programming process, the committees have tended to use this as just another piece of information about a project, and generally they will. I think you'll find when we get to the technical application portion of things that those projects that are highly aligned with the plan do tend to score better. That's not terribly surprising, given that the scoring criteria and methodology developed by the committees is generally reflective of the goals and objectives of the Metropolitan Transportation Plan. So having things that are aligned with those goals and objectives, the projects do tend to score better. As far as projects of similar nature, kind of scoring the same, I think that's probably maybe in general, but every project is unique. The circumstances surrounding it are unique, and therefore the scoring criteria reacts to different projects differently. There is some element of kind of the grant writer or applicant, if you will, and the skill and kind of the time that they apply to this, much like any application process. I think those applicants that complete the application in full and don't leave kind of any application section blank do tend to score better. So, but as far as projects of similar nature scoring the same, that's hard to say, because every project has unique circumstances and unique data that goes along with it.
Thank you, Mark.
Mm-hmm.
And Nicholas, did that address your question?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. Any other thoughts on that second question before we move on to the third one? I think we'll have a couple of takers for the third question. So let's move on to the third question. Michael, you said that you had a comment about that, so I'll invite you to chime in.
Yeah, I actually had two comments I'll share really quick. So with the green infrastructure component, and I'm speaking exclusively to bike ped here. The first is the consideration should be like if the bike ped projects, if they are connective in nature. So if it's just a trail or a sidewalk that's not really connected to any existing infrastructure, then it really shouldn't be considered green infrastructure because it's not really contributing to a network. But the other part of it is bike ped green infrastructure projects should also be considered on the level of protection and separation. So if it's just requests for adding paint, it shouldn't be considered green infrastructure because it's going to be a very narrow definition of who's going to feel comfortable using those facilities over the long term. More protective, so more separation, whether it be a trail or some sort of physical vertical separation, should lead it more to being considered a portion of green infrastructure.
Thank you. Good comments. Appreciate that, Michael. So, Dean, I see you dropped a comment in the chat. I'm going to go ahead and read it and then invite you to expand on that from what it says in the chat. It says it appears those projects should be considered inherently green infrastructure. Regarding traffic signalization, they should provide more detail as to its green impact. Anything you'd like to add, Mayor Katterndall?
The first part's self-evident. Yeah, it does seem to make sense, but I would say with the caveats that Michael Kelly just spoke to. On the traffic operations, it seems like there ought to be a little more information to go into that before deciding whether they're a green infrastructure project or not. I'd like that a little more, or I guess the projects that claim that, a little more elaboration on what exactly they're doing and what the benefits are in terms of green infrastructure.
Thank you. Appreciate that. And one thing to add there, it did not make it into the slides, but I'll go ahead and answer your question here, Dean. The co-chairs of our Sustainable Places Policy Committee did indicate, we did have a note that the Planning Sustainable Places request did not specifically advance a Planning Sustainable Places study. Which there may be a little bit of semantics there, but you both indicated that, yeah, the Planning Sustainable Places program does advance the goals of the Planning Sustainable Places work. So we should claim credit of that program. And I think you're right. Probably should have, but we hadn't. But the Planning Sustainable Places study was categorized as a highly aligned project. So I did see your note. I just wanted to address it. Any other thoughts on the third question? And we're coming up on 2 o'clock here. So I'll move on to the fourth question, see if anybody has any thoughts on that. Is the process, does it raise the quality of submitted projects? Is it helpful to the region overall? Is it helpful to project sponsors? We've asked this question as part of our debrief at the conclusion of this work. A couple of different times now, we've received positive feedback. It does add a step in our process, in our programming process, so we're very mindful of the work that it takes to submit the pre-application and to review the pre-applications by policy committee. So we do have the question of whether it adds value to our process overall. And we'll be asking this question again once we're done with this work. I'm gonna assume the answer is yes, but as I said, we will be asking this question again as we engage directly with our planning and policy committees over the next few months, and over the next year or so, as we get ready for the next version of this work, the 2026 call for projects. If you do have any questions at any point that or any more answers about these questions outside of this meeting, I would invite you and ask you to please reach out to me and share those with me. I'll be very interested to hear any additional feedback about this process. We did have Leslie shared a couple of additional thoughts here. I didn't review the project, so I'm curious to know if project sponsors commented on their own projects. That's a great question. The answer is no. the project sponsors, or the person that was listed in an application that's submitting the project sponsor was not able to comment on their own projects. However, someone else from that agency that also happens to serve on a planning or policy committee, they could have submitted a response. And we did see some of that, but the project sponsors, the person that submitted an application was not able to comment on the project that they themselves submitted. Another comment from Dean, believe the process does raise the quality of the projects, especially as they relate to the goals of the vision. You get projects more focused. So thank you. That's how we'd like to think we're accomplishing. I'd like to hear that from you as well. And thank you, Leslie, for sharing also concurrence with that statement from Dean. I'll go ahead and keep going. I have just a couple more slides about next steps and where we are in the process, and then we'll be wrapping this up. Coming up on 2 o'clock here. So as the next steps, we will be sharing the comments, the results of the staff assessment, and also the committee member assessment work with the project sponsors. I am going to be providing a high-level overview of this presentation to the Total Transportation Policy Committee in their meeting in about a week and a half from now. So they'll be receiving a shorter version of this presentation, and then we'll be packaging all of these comments and sharing the results of the draft assessment and planning committee member review of that. And again, as a reminder, I said this a couple of times already, the alignment determinations or categorization of projects may still change based on any revised information that is sent in as part of the phase 2 technical application. So that's our next step in the process. Quick reminder on the timeline where we are with this. We are looking at June 20th, actually opening the portal for the phase 2 technical application. That's when we'll be opening that. On June 26th, just a week later or so, we will be hosting a technical application workshop as that full technical application is open. The full technical application portal will close down on July 26th, so it'll be open for a little bit longer than a month. So July 26th will be deadline for closing those down. August and September, staff will be conducting the scoring of those projects, and the staff scoring should be complete, we hope, by the month of September, and we will be turning that information over to our programming committees, who will be working through and developing funding recommendations through the month of November and December, when we anticipate those programming recommendations being complete. And all of this information should be ready for January of 2025 TDPC and MARC board action to include these new projects and new programming amounts into our transportation improvement program. Mark, anything else to add as far as next steps at this point?
Nothing really to add as far as next steps. Just want to remind everybody of that June 26th date for the phase 2 technical application workshop. That workshop is really only kind of applicable to people who have submitted an application. And so we will be sending kind of information about that and a Zoom link to that particular technical application workshop to those people that have registered. If you are aware that somebody has submitted an application and is no longer with a particular agency, please do let us know so that we can make adjustments and get new contact information associated with each of the applications and get folks kind of plugged into the opportunities that are upcoming. We will do our best to make sure that every jurisdiction that has submitted an application, or every applicant that has submitted an application, that we are sending kind of notice of this phase 2 technical application workshop to at least 2 people within that organization to hopefully account for anybody that has kind of left their position and we've not heard any update about where things stand with that particular application. So do look for that information coming soon. Again, if you know of people that have submitted something under phase 1 that are no longer with a particular organization, please do let us know, and we'll work with you to try and change the contact information associated with that application.
Thank you, Mark. Appreciate it. And I think that's it as far as our program goes today. We're at right at 1 hour, right at 2 o'clock. Ron, any final comments or thoughts?
No, thanks everyone for your participation so far in the process, and good luck to those of you with jurisdictions with projects that are going to be competing in phase 2.
Thank you, Ron. Thanks, everyone. And once again, appreciate your time this afternoon. And we are adjourned. Thank you.